So what is China doing to counter this downward trend in the economic relations with Africa? Beijing certainly has crafted ambitious plans to counter this downturn and to what so-called, quote, upgrade the relations between China and Africa in terms of their economic cooperation. There are several priorities. The first one is on industrial capacity cooperation. In China's blueprint for the next stage of its economic relations with Africa, the connection and integration between the development strategies of China on one hand and of Africa on the other hand, based on industrial capacity cooperation, is a key focus. This policy design is based on a simple assumption that African countries are at a historical moment to expedite their own industrialization and modernization, while at the same time China is adjusting its domestic economic structure. Therefore, the mutual complementarity of their priorities and the strategic orientation creates an opportunity for them to work with each other. China hopes that its Chinese strengths in technologies and capitals would be paired with Africa's advantage in natural and labor resources. By combining the comparative advantages of the two partners, China could transfer its labor-intensive industries to Africa to boost the industrial capacity of African countries, while freeing China from its declining export-oriented labor-intensive industries. China believes that with the infrastructure development and human resources capacity building, it will be able to assist Africa to achieve its own independent industrial systems and secure a sustainable future. The second priority of China is focused on Africa's infrastructure development. According to a report by my Brookings colleague, Amadou, last year, the official investment from China makes about 20% of the external finance Africa receives for its infrastructure development. China's emphasis on infrastructure development in Africa precedes the discussion of Africa under the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, 3 years ago, as early as 2013 and 14, the Chinese top leaders had announced that high-speed railway network, highway network, and the regional air transportation network as China's top priority in Africa's infrastructure development. From the Chinese perspective, infrastructure development in Africa is as important for Africa's growth as it is for China's own economic restructuring, especially in terms of the absorption of China's overcapacity in the infrastructure-related industries. The third priority in China's Africa economic relations is to foster the role of private Chinese businesses through less restrictive capital requirements, loosened qualification requirements, and support by government funds to facilitate trade and investment. Private companies' role has grown substantially in the past few years. Last year, as high as 53% of Sino-Africa trade was conducted by private Chinese companies. And perhaps this is because the Chinese state-owned enterprises, traditionally, their trade was more related to the trading of raw materials. And last year, the trade by SOE, Chinese SOEs, dropped by 29% year on year, while the trade by private companies grew by 10%. So the Chinese SOEs' investments in Africa also dropped significantly in 2015. This was not only due to China's economic slowdown and the decision to pursue economic restructuring. The high rate of failure of projects by Chinese overseas FDI conducted by the Chinese SOEs have also induced a more strict approval process and procedures by the Chinese government internally, to which the SOEs are subject. According to, for example, according to the vice chair of the Chinese Mining Association, almost 80% of Chinese mining companies' overseas merge and acquisition are regarded as a failure. Last but not least, there's a question of natural resources. What role does natural resources still play in China's economic relations in Africa? Natural resources are hardly mentioned anymore in any of the government policy statements or government assessments or policy papers. The scarcity of reference is not in line with the still significant role natural resources plays in China's imports from Africa. As of 2015, the majority of Africa exports to China remains in natural resources. According to the statistics by the Chinese customs, crude oil, iron ore, diamonds, agricultural products, and other mineral resources, together combined, still accounted for about more than 65% of Chinese total import from Africa. And this number is on the low end, if you remember, because China's demand for raw materials has been suppressed by the economic slowdown.